Hey, Ty Brady here with Brady Insurance Marketing in the Ty Brady Way, one of the nation's largest field marketing organizations that helps independent agents achieve a 6- and 7-figure income with the systems and strategies that I'm going to talk about with you today. Welcome back to another episode of the Ty Brady Way. I've had a lot of questions. The people have asked me about my trip that I took to Africa. You know, that was probably 22, 23 years in the making, where I finally had a buddy that had the financial means to do the same thing. And we started planning that trip right before COVID. And then obviously things got shut down, and so it got delayed. And part of the problem is the guide we were going to go with, he had people that he had already taken deposits with to go to Africa, that they had to come in line first. But we finally made it. Couple of things is we did a 10-day hunt. It was 12 days of travel, and it was getting there was nice because I was anxious to get there. But one of the bad things was coming home from we had to take a flight from Port Elizabeth to Johannesburg, and then Johannesburg to home. It was a 16.5-hour flight, and most of those flights you leave there in the evening. And you land back, as an example, in Atlanta, and it's daylight. But I remember falling asleep on the way home because I was tired. Hunting in South Africa was up at 5:30 to bed at 9. We did that all day, every day, especially with the amount of animals I had purchased to harvest. I had to make sure that we got those done. But it was, I remember waking up on that airplane and I still had 8.5 hours to go. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? So, but just be prepared that if you're going to go to South Africa, is where I went, it's a long flight, but it was well worth it. Some things that were interesting to me is, we hunted family ranches that had been around since 1824 or 1801. And I think Africa gets a lot of flack about high fenced, ranches. And there are some of those. Don't get me wrong. There's high fenced where they may bring in an animal for somebody to harvest. But where we hunted, the animals were free ranging, and we hunted 7 different ranches. And the reason that we hunted 7 different ranches is different species were at different locations. I think the highest elevation we hunted was probably 6,700 feet. I live in the Rocky Mountains, and so there's a thing called buckbrush. They have a different tree that is not called buckbrush, but it's similar to that, but very similar terrain. And, I hunted a kudu, which is similar to a Rocky Mountain elk, and they were actually rutting, so that was cool to see. But it was a very, so we're hunting high elevation, low elevation, understanding that the game that's there is owned by the landowner. So what would happen is a lot of people ask me, well, did you eat the meat or can you bring it home? You're not allowed to take the meat from another country into the U.S., so the meat had to stay there. However, you're able to bring back taxidermy or, in my instance, I'm doing European mounts and 2 rugs. So I'm going to have 2 office rugs that I'm going to put down that I was able to do. And then all of the horns that I was able to have from these animals, I'm going to hang in my garage. But you have to leave the meat there. But here's what they do with the meat. So the previous week's hunters that were there, we eat the meat that they previously had harvested. So I was able to eat springbuck, nyala, kudu, warthog. The only thing I was not able to eat was a red hartebeest. And the red hartebeest, and I was, people are like, was it gamey? Actually, it was awesome. The meat was so good. So the meat that those previous the previous animals those hunters killed was the meat we ate. And then what we ended up harvesting, my buddy and I, went to the next week hunters. And any meat that the landowner doesn't want, because that's who has the first right of refusal on the meat, goes to a butcher. It's chopped up and then sold. And then the money, usually the guide keeps it, and the guide gives the landowner the dollars and cents from that animal that was harvested. All of the animals are privately owned. I'd say it's similar to like Texas. A lot of Texas, Texas, there isn't a bunch of BLM land or state land. Most of it's private. So the game there is also private. But it was a culture shock. I mean, you would talk to the guy who owned a farm, and he's the youngest of 3. And he said, my 2 older brothers didn't want to do it. My one brother's in
he ships seafood. So seafood is what he did. His other brother worked for some corporation, but he took the farm over. And he has 13 ranch hands. They work for $250 a month. They don't have to pay for room and board, though. They don't have to pay for clothes. They don't have to. They really don't have any expenses other than their wage. To think about that, they work for less than $3,000 a year, and they survive in these ranches. And he says, I always have a weekly meeting with my ranch hands, kind of what I want them to do. And he says, I always encourage them to take some of that money and to go buy sheep or buy cattle. He's like, they can run it on my land so that they have something for retirement, and they don't. One of the other things they do, I didn't mention, is they get a sheep and $250 a month. So sheep, they feed their animals. And I'm telling you, there is not a single piece of that animal that goes to waste. And that's kind of how it goes, is they are prized possessions. They treat these animals like gold because that's where a lot of their revenue comes in from their hunts that they do. The cost, I get asked that a lot too. It ran just shy of $7,000, or you can say it cost 135,000 Rand. So maybe I should just tell you it was 135,000 Rand, but it was a little under $7,000 and then airfare, and it took about 2.5 years to get to the guide. We stayed in 3 different locations. We stayed at a place called the Afton House because we couldn't get a flight out to Port Elizabeth the same day, so we had to stay at the Afton House one night, which was awesome. You know, they had taxidermy there. They fed us. They had a pool. They had a private room. I mean, they really catered to foreigners and hunters that come in. Then we stayed at a place called Spring Vale. Spring Vale was a ranch that was, I believe he said it was 6,000 acres. And we stayed in a house that was a rambler, about 8,000 square feet. Huge. And, what's interesting is that ranch has been for sale for a long time. But there was ranch hands that were right adjacent to us where we stayed there. And then the last one we went to was Nick Bowker's new completed ranch. What do they call them? They call them places where hunters stay. He had 8 rooms, and they catered to you 3 meals a day. You got a lunch. Every time I went back to my room, it was, big old king size bed, running water, Wi-Fi so you could talk home. It was about a 7-hour difference. So I'd be going to bed and my kids would be getting up here. So then when I was, getting up, my kids were asleep. So we had to kind of work that out a little bit. And the power goes out about every 3 to 4 hours because the country does not produce enough power for the supply that's needed. So we ate a lot of dinners under candlelight. And what's happening is a lot of them are transitioning to solar with inverters and battery packs so that they can be self-sufficient. And some of these ranches, they're off the grid. They have zero grid. They're running septic, they're running solar, they may have a diesel generator, so if the power goes down. But just kind of a cultural shock that is so interesting. The population, I think, in South Africa, not South Africa, but Africa in general, or South Africa is about 60 million, which I thought was a big number, but it's a big state. And just a total culture shock. There is definitely a culture divide, and there are people. It's segregated. Even the police officers where I was at had security guards. The guide's wife, she was a school teacher, and she told us a story about the lawnmower, the weed eater, and all the school supplies got taken out of the janitorial closet, and the security guys found it the very next day. The police did, and the security guards. So definitely a culture shock. The food was great. They live on very simple means. What I would tell you is don't go into town at the end of the month, because we did, and it was a zoo because everyone got paid. So everybody was there spending their hard-earned dollars. Unfortunately, most of them would spend it on alcohol or other substances. That's kind of where they blow their money that they make every month. Because again, they don't have to pay a lot of them don't pay for room, board, food, meals, stuff like that's all provided. So all they have is their supplemental income to buy shoes, shirts, or something that they may want. Africa was a great experience. Hopefully all of you understand that none of that meat went to waste. anything that was harvested was put back in the community, and that community thrives because of that, especially where we were. I would encourage anybody that wants to do it to do it. It was a bucket list for me. I will go back. In fact, I talked to my sons when they graduate from high school. They want to go back. I want to wait till they're a little bit older so they appreciate it. Last thing is I shot a 300. There was a 300 with a 200 grain bullet. Most of my shots were 200 to 471 yards, and it was just a great experience. So for all of you that know that I went to Africa, hopefully you'll be able to listen to this and tune in, and we'll catch you on the next one. Make sure you always share, like, and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Ty Brady Way. As always, share, like, and subscribe. Go to Instagram at ty.r.brady. And as always, love hearing from you. And let me know what you want to learn on the show or what you'd like me to bring up on the show. Thanks.
You can find the Ty Brady Way on Instagram as well as Facebook. To stay connected with giveaways and Ty himself, go ahead and follow at ty.r.brady on Instagram as well as Facebook. This podcast was recorded, edited, and produced by Whitney Face Media Marketing. And the theme music is an excerpt from Hot Chicken of the Woods by Isaac Joel.